there are videos that would show whether the aircraft that struck the Pentagon was, in fact, a Boeing 757. But the FBI confiscated these videos within minutes after the attacks, and now the authorities have refused to release them. 6, the fact that the aircraft was not shot down by the Pentagon's anti-aircraft defense system suggests that it belonged to the U.S. military. So, whether or not the Pentagon was hit by Flight 77, the evidence suggests it must have been an inside job. We can conclude the same thing about the attacks on the World Trade Center. Why? Because the collapses of the Twin Towers and Building Number 7 had to have been examples of controlled demolition, brought about by thousands of explosives placed throughout each of the buildings. No foreign terrorists could have obtained the kind of access to the buildings this would have required. One reason for concluding that the 3 buildings were brought down by explosive is the very fact that they did collapse. High-rise steel frame buildings have never, before or after 9/11, been caused to collapse by fire. Even when, as in the Philadelphia fire of 1999 and the Madrid fire of February of this year, the fires were much larger, much hotter, and much longer lasting than any of the fires in the World Trade Center. The second reason is the specific nature of the collapses, each feature of which points to explosives. For example, the buildings collapsed straight down and at virtually free fall speed, as in controlled demolitions. And then the rubble smoldered for months afterwards. With regard to the Twin Towers in particular, many people in the building said that they felt or heard explosions. Virtually all the concrete of these enormous structures was pulverized into very fine dust. Try this. Get a piece of concrete and drop it a little over 1,000 feet and see if it pulverizes into very fine dust. It won't happen. Much of this dust, along with steel and aluminum, was blown out horizontally from the buildings several hundred feet. Most of the steel beams and columns came down in sections about 30 feet long, conveniently ready to be loaded onto trucks. And pools of molten steel were found beneath the rubble. These and even more effects point to the existence of very powerful, precisely placed explosives. A third thing supporting the theory of controlled demolitions is evidence of a deliberate cover-up. If the building's steel columns and beams had indeed been broken by explosives, an examination of the steel would have revealed this fact. However, although it is normally a federal offense to remove anything from a crime scene, the steel was quickly loaded onto trucks and put on ships headed for Asia to be melted down. I will mention one more example of the cover-up. Insofar as there is an official story as to why the towers collapsed, it is the pancake theory, according to which the floors above the destruction caused by the airplanes collapsed on the floor below, and then those floors collapsed on the floor below that, and then it pancaked all the way down. Now, even if this theory were remotely plausible, can you imagine it pancaking at free fall speed? The other problem is what happened to the 47 massive steel columns that constituted the core of each of these twin towers. They were the weight-bearing structures of each tower. Those 47, even if the pancake theory were true, those 47 steel beams should have been sticking up at least several hundred feet into the air, just like the old phonographs, where sometimes the 78 records would collapse, but the spindle's still sticking up in the air. You should have had 47 spindles still sticking up in the air. Well, what did the 9/11 Commission report do about that problem? It avoided the problem incredibly by simply denying the existence of these columns, even though those columns, I'm not making this up. These columns were the unique feature of these towers when they were first built. So, the Commission report, after saying falsely that most of the weight of each tower was borne by the steel columns in its exterior walls, this supposedly authoritative report said the interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft in which elevators and stairwells were grouped. Such a desperate lie is a sure sign of a cover-up. In any case, when we look at all these features of the collapses, the idea that they could have been caused by the impact of the airplanes plus the resulting fires is ridiculous. This is even clearer with regard to building number 7, which wasn't hit by any airplane, and yet it came down about 5:30 that afternoon. Its collapse remains so impossible to explain, except as controlled demolition, that the 9/11 Commission report did not even mention it, as if the collapse of a 47-story building was not worthy of comment. And it only had fires on floors numbers 7 and 12 of 47 stories. In sum, the collapses and the cover-up, like the strike on the Pentagon, the military's failure to prevent the attacks, and its ever-changing stories, show that the attacks must have been planned and executed by our own political and military leaders. The same conclusion can be inferred from the behavior of the Secret Service agents with the President that morning. As everyone who saw Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11 knows, President Bush was in a second-grade classroom that morning in Florida when he was informed about the second strike on the World Trade Center. The first strike he dismissed as a horrible accident, a bad pilot. But with the second one, it was clear America was under an unprecedented terrorist attack. And yet the President simply sat there. Many people have asked why he did not spring into action, assuming his role as Commander-in-Chief. But the real question, which Michael Moore mentioned in passing, is why the Secret Service did not immediately rush him away to a safe place. Bush's location had been highly publicized, and if the attacks were a complete surprise, executed solely by foreign terrorists, the Secret Service agents would have had no idea how many planes had been hijacked. They would have had to assume that the President himself might be the target of one of the attacks. For all they would have known, a hijacked airliner might have been heading towards them at that very moment, ready to crash into the school and kill the President and everyone else. And yet these agents, who are highly trained to respond instantly in such situations, allowed the President to remain in the classroom another 10 minutes. They then allowed him to remain at the school to give his regularly scheduled TV address to the nation. This behavior makes sense only if the head of the Secret Service detail knew that the planned attacks did not include an attack on the President. And how could they know this for certain unless the attacks were being carried out by people within our own government? Although many more examples could be given, These four are sufficient to suggest that there is no escape from the frightening conclusion that 9/11 was engineered by the Bush administration and its Pentagon. As to why they would do this, at least part of the answer is clear from the way in which they have used 9/11 to advance the American empire. Immediately after 9/11, in fact, members of the Bush administration repeatedly referred to the attacks as an opportunity. In the words of Donald Rumsfeld, an opportunity to refashion the world. Seeing this connection between 9/11 and the American empire can be a stimulus to face up fully to the awful truth about this empire. To be sure, as Chomsky, Falk, and Chalmers-Johnson illustrate, very strong portrayals of American empire imperialism as far from benign can be drawn without any suggestion that the Bush administration arranged 9/11. These portrayals can be drawn from publicly available documents. One such document is the National Security Strategy of the United States of America, published by the Bush administration in September of 2002. David North says, not unfairly, that this document asserts as the guiding policy of the United States the right to use military force against any country it believes to be or believes at some point may become a threat to American interests. No other country in modern history, adds North, has asserted such a sweeping claim to world domination. Another such document, called Vision for 2020, was published in February of 1997 by the U.S. Space Command. The mission statement at the head of this document reads, U.S. Space Command dominating the space dimension of military operations to protect U.S. interests and investments. Nothing about freedom, democracy, and human rights. In the body of the document, in fact, we find this amazingly candid statement. The globalization of the world economy will continue with a widening between haves and have-nots. The point of this statement is that as the domination of the world economy by the United States and its allies increases, the world's poor will get still poorer, making the have-nots hate America all the more. We will need, therefore, the power to keep them in line. The United States can do this, and this is the document's main message, through full spectrum dominance, which will involve merging space superiority with land, sea, and air superiority. Dominance in space will include, the document frankly says, the power to deny others the use of space. By speaking only of the Space Command's effort to develop a missile defense system, the Pentagon and the White House like to suggest that its purpose is purely defensive. But the goal includes weaponizing space so as to give U.S. forces, in the words of a more recent document, a prompt global strike capability, whether nuclear or non-nuclear, that will allow the U.S. to rapidly and accurately strike distant targets. The fact that the U.S. Space Command's program is an aggressive one is announced in the logo of one of its divisions, "In your face from outer space." Simply from these and other documents, taken in conjunction with the actions of the Bush administration and the U.S. military, we can see through the claim that the U.S. project of creating the first truly global empire is a benevolent or even benign enterprise. However, we can fully grasp the extent to which this project is propelled by fanaticism based on a deeply perverted value system, Only when we